Hello, fight fans. Thanks for joining us at MMA Insider. Before we get rolling with today's news, show some love by hitting that like button and subscribing. Now let's uncover the latest happenings in MMA. Starting off, the UFC issues statement after antitrust settlement gets denied by judge. Moving on, Chael Sonnen calls for Tony Ferguson's retirement win or lose at UFC Abu Dhabi, shares recent talk with his father. Next, Strickland blames political wokeness for Summer Olympics boxing controversy. Moving on, Israel Adesanya speaks on widely discussed Olympic boxing controversy. Lastly, UFC commentator Joe Rogan explains why the Olympics is a giant scam. The UFC has issued a statement after the antitrust settlement was denied by a judge. Judge Richard Boulware has denied the antitrust lawsuit settlement against the Ultimate Fighting Championship. A settlement of $335 million was reached in March of 2024. It was to be an end to fighters challenging the promotion for better fighter pay. Apparently, the judge said not so fast and blocked the settlement. In response, the UFC released the following statement to the press. We obviously disagree with this ruling and believe it disregards the expertise of counsel from both sides, as well as that of an accomplished and expert mediator, all of whom have decades of experience in antitrust case law. It prevents the athletes from receiving what they have argued is in their best interest and unwinds an extensively negotiated settlement that, in the plaintiff's counsel's own words, would far surpass the typical antitrust class action settlement and is an excellent result for the settlement classes by all traditional measures. Additionally, by taking the unusual step of denying the settlement at this preliminary approval stage, the judge is also denying the athletes their right to be heard during this pivotal moment in the case. As we have said throughout this process, we believe strongly in the merits of our cases and are evaluating all our options, including, without limitation, an appeal, and have initiated discussions with plaintiffs' counsel, who have expressed a willingness to engage in separate settlement discussions for the Lee and Johnson cases. Stay tuned for what the next steps will be. Are you surprised that the UFC antitrust settlement was denied? Do you think it will work out better for fighters if the lawsuit goes to trial? Share your thoughts in comments. UFC Hall of Famer Chael Sonnen wants to see Tony Ferguson hang up the gloves this weekend, regardless of the fight result. Ferguson will face fellow The Ultimate Fighter winner Michael on Saturday at UFC Abu Dhabi. He returns to welterweight to potentially win his first fight in 5 years. Ferguson has lost 7 consecutive fights since defeating Donald Cerrone at UFC 238. During his losing skid, many pundits and fans have called for the 40-year-old Ferguson to retire, including UFC CEO Dana White. Sonnen, a former teammate of Ferguson, wants to see the UFC fan favorite walk away from the cage, regardless if he defeats Michael or not. He thinks Ferguson should prioritize his long-term health over continuing to compete against the best fighters in the world. During a recent episode of Good Guy, Bad Guy, Sonnen weighed in on Ferguson's potential UFC finale. Here is what he said. I had a chance to speak with someone really close to Tony Ferguson, who was Tony's father. When I spoke to Mr. Ferguson, and this was just prior to his last fight, and it's not what you would think. His father was very aware, in support for his son, and he's had these same conversations with him. He shared this very candidly, this wasn't private. I'd kind of like to see it be his last fight at UFC Abu Dhabi. Iron sharpens iron, that's true, but iron dulls iron as well. I just think that Tony Ferguson, I don't think he's abused his body, he's used his body, I don't think he abused his career. I would like to see him call it a day and be able to live with the result, whether it's for him or against him. Ferguson is one of the greatest UFC lightweights of all time, with wins over the likes of Rafael dos Anjos, Anthony Pettis, and Edson Barboza. He made his UFC debut in 2011 after winning the TUF 13 tournament. Ferguson is likely on the last leg of his combat sports career, and Sonnen wants to see the UFC star walk away and transition to the next chapter of his life. Former UFC middleweight champion Strickland didn't mince words in expressing his views on the controversy surrounding Olympic boxing. Strickland is in line for another UFC middleweight title shot after defeating Paulo Costa at UFC 302. Before that, he lost to Dricus du Plessis at UFC 297, ending his middleweight title reign. Strickland is never afraid to make his opinions known on a variety of issues, including gender. In light of the massive controversy surrounding Olympic boxer Imane Khelif, Strickland didn't hold back. In a recent post to his X page, Strickland weighed in on the controversy surrounding Khelif and Olympic boxing. Here is what he said. Here's the facts. The Olympics didn't test this boxer for political reasons. This boxer has failed a gender test in the past. The boxer may be intersex. This situation was created because the Olympics failed their athletes and their fans out of political wokeness. Khelif, an Algerian boxer, defeated Italy's Angela Carini at the 2024 Summer Olympics this week. Just seconds into the fight, Carini quit the bout after taking a series of devastating punches to her face. Khelif's emphatic performance is marred by questions about their gender. Last year, at the 2023 World Championships, Khelif failed a gender eligibility test after testing positive for male chromosomes. Despite the failed test last year, Khelif was still permitted to compete in Paris by the International Olympic Committee. It's uncertain if the IOC tested Khelif under similar benchmarks. Since the story went viral, it's been reported that Khelif suffers from Swyer syndrome, a genetic condition that can cause a woman to be born with XY chromosomes. This would explain the failed gender eligibility test last year, as Strickland referred to. In the meantime, Strickland is adding to the uproar regarding Khelif and their eligibility, especially at a time in which transgender athletes are a hotly debated topic. Former UFC middleweight champion Israel Adesanya has spoken out on one of the biggest talking points of the 2024 Summer Olympics. Adesanya will return to the UFC octagon against middleweight title holder Dricus du Plessis at UFC 305 later this month. He returns to the cage almost a full year removed from a loss to Sean Strickland at UFC 293. In the meantime, Adesanya, like many around the world, is keeping a close eye on the 2024 Summer Olympics in Paris. This year's Olympic Games haven't proceeded without a fair share of controversy in and out of the competition. One hot topic surrounding the Olympics is Imane Khelif, an Algerian boxer who defeated Italy's Angela Carini at the Games. Khelif, who identifies as a female, failed a gender eligibility test during a 2023 competition, but passed pre-competition tests ahead of the 2024 Olympics. Carini quit just seconds into the fight against Khelif due to a possible broken nose. In a recent tweet, Adesanya addressed the controversy surrounding Khelif and Olympic boxing. Here's what he said: "Men should not be boxing women. Lol, he couldn't even finish her. Anyway, people politics." Adesanya is one of the biggest fan favorites in the UFC, with title wins over the likes of Alex Pereira and Robert Whittaker. He has the potential to become a three-time UFC middleweight champion with a victory over du Plessis. UFC commentator Joe Rogan has explained why he isn't the biggest fan of the Olympic Games. As we know, the 2024 Summer Olympics are currently ongoing in Paris, France. There are some incredible athletes taking part in some marvelous events as fans from around the globe gather to watch it all unfold. Of course, not everyone is a massive fan of the Games, including the aforementioned Joe Rogan. It's no secret that Rogan is an opinionated guy. In the last few years, in particular, he seems to have taken things to another level. From conspiracy theories to intriguing debates on his podcast, he isn't afraid to make some noise and ruffle some feathers. During a recent episode, he spoke candidly about the Olympics and his big problem. Here is what he said. "The Olympics is a giant scam. There are two things going on simultaneously, okay? You have the best athletes in the world participating in their disciplines. And then on top of that, you have enormous amounts of money being made, and none of it's going to the athletes. It is a giant scam. So the kind of people that are putting together that ridiculous ceremony, we got a bunch of drag queens in the Last Supper that nobody understands because it's not made by athletes, it's not made by the Olympics, it's made by the people that are in charge of putting the Olympics out. So they're the ones who are reaping all the money and sucking all the cash out of these athletes." Based on Joe Rogan's comments about the Olympics being a giant scam, could you elaborate on how he believes the commercialization of the Games detracts from the athletes' achievements? Specifically, how does Rogan argue that the substantial profits generated by the Olympics are not benefiting the athletes themselves? And what does he suggest about the role of those organizing the ceremonies in this dynamic? Additionally, how does Rogan's critique reflect on the broader issue of commercialization and profit in sports and entertainment? Let us know your thoughts. Thank you so much for tuning into today's video. Your dedication and support fuel our passion to bring you the latest and greatest in the MMA world. If you enjoyed today's news, please give us a thumbs up and share it with fellow MMA fans. Remember to subscribe to stay in the loop with daily MMA updates. We've got a lot of exciting news, interviews, and analysis coming your way every single day. Your engagement helps us grow and serve the MMA community even better. Once again, thank you for being an integral part of our daily MMA journey.